Today's episode is brought to you by Craftsy. Calling all crafters, are you ready to dive deep into your favorite crafting projects and learn new techniques along the way? Then it's time to join Craftsy Premium Membership. Take advantage of this extended Black Friday deal. For only $1.49, you'll receive a full year of access to expert-led tutorials, patterns, and projects in every category you can imagine. With a massive library of resources at your fingertips, you'll be able to create your best work yet and bring your crafting dreams to life. Don't wait. Sign up now at craftsyoffers.com and discover the endless possibilities of Craftsy Premium Membership. Thank you so much, Craftsy. And now, here's the show. Welcome to episode 279 of the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals where you can strengthen your creative business, stay up to date on industry news, and build connections within our supportive trade association. Check it out at craftindustyalliance.org. Today on the show, we are talking about craftivism with my guest, Shannon Downey. Shannon is an artist, activist, craftivist, community builder, and general instigator. Her work moves people from passive consumers of art into engaged creators and leverages craft-based art forms to bring people together, present opportunities to transition from maker to change makers, and inspire radical hope for what is possible. She's the founder of Badass Cross Stitch, and her new book, Let's Move the Needle, provides a roadmap and accessible toolkit for burgeoning art activists with self-reflective activities, exercises, prompts, and stories. Shannon Downey, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have you. You were a guest back in May of 2018, which feels kind of like a long time ago now, considering what happened in those intervening years. So for folks who are curious, I'll link to that episode in the show notes, but we're going to kind of pick up where we left off there because lots has gone on since that time. But before we do, can you tell us a little bit about growing up? I think you were sort of in an activist and politically engaged family from an early age, because it kind of sets the stage for what happens, as you kind of enter into your career.
Yeah, I am from the Boston area, and my family was sort of always deeply involved in, at that point, the labor movement, and also the Democratic Party and organizing. So, my dad was the president of the Boston Pipefitters Union for many years, and as I grew up, there were several actions that took place and legislative things that were going on, and so my home became the hub of all things Vote No on 2, which is all I remember about this initiative was the chant. But it was there were always just a million people in my house, and they were meeting and making signs and building strategies and eating pizza. And it was so fun. And so my introduction to activism and to civic engagement was always in a space of fun and joy. So it sort of went from there. It was just sort of like this, the air I breathed. And then that expanded and evolved and shifted a lot as I had my own lived experiences, as I went to college, as I left college and entered the workforce, and sort of all of the layers and layers of humanness that happens once you move on.
Yeah. And I think also there's an element here about class, and you talk about this in your book, which I think is really refreshing because I feel like it's a conversation we don't have enough in America. But you sort of describe yourself as working class growing up, and the impact that your sort of relationship with money and earning money and having enough money and a lot of money and all of that has had on sort of the way that you developed your career and even how it impacted relationships and things like that. I think that that's something, like I said, we don't talk about enough, but really is underlies so much of how we act in the world.
Yeah, and it took me being an adult and realizing like, oh man, I have so much baggage around money, and not, like sort of uh, having friends who, like as an adult, are really affluent, and I'd never been in spaces with folks who had uh, a lot of money. And so I started to be in these spaces and I was uncomfortable in them. But then I realized like how much judgment I was carrying around of these people just as a result of the programming I got as a kid. Like, we will never have enough money. People who do have enough money or who have lots of money are, like doing bad things or, shouldn't be trusted with it or whatever. Whatever those messages were. And so it really, it took a lot of work to sort of undo that, really examine my relationship to money and to resources, and think through how I wanted to live in a capitalist society, you know, um, without the judgment, and also making sure that like I can care for myself. And what does it mean to be an independent artist in a capitalist society? And like, where does our value come from? And how do we gauge success? And so all of those things. So it deeply impacts how I do my work now, right? Like, most of my work is pay what you can. And it's an interesting model, and it really like ebbs and flows based on sort of what's happening in the world. And so, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was a boom, right? Like, everybody just was like, we're just at home. We want to support artists. We want to support
Hmm.
activists. We want to support people who are doing. And then that really like, sort of tapered off. And, now we're in a very different place with things. And I think the fear of what's coming has led to a lot of people sort of, but paying less. And so it's really interesting. But now at this point, that ebb and flow doesn't impact me personally. It doesn't impact how I feel about others. It doesn't impact how I feel about the work. It's just like, oh, this is an interesting pattern that happens sort of societally and systemically, based on how people feel comfortable, in their place in the world with regard to money.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, to be able to get that distance after personal examination is so incredibly helpful, especially as a working artist, because when those ebbs happen versus the flows,
Yeah.
as you said, you don't take it personally. And I see often, not just with artists, but with other craft business owners, that you can become very embittered
Yeah.
when times are tough, and you can become blameful of your customers or the very people you really wanted to serve. So I think that it's admirable to be able to just take that step back and really understand where those feelings are coming from, and instead be able to notice them, instead of having them sort of control you.
Yeah. It's so easy to get hurt by it, right? It's so easy to be upset and to feel like, do you guys even care about me? Like, you've been supporting me and now you're just sort of like, oh, can't. And like, it's sort of, I mean, it's the same with movement building, right? We get people in times of like urgency and in times of like, oh my God, I have to do something. And then as things sort of like settle down, people bow out. And then you're like, but wait, don't you still care about this movement? Don't you still care? Like things are going to get worse again if you don't stick around and like continue this work. And then we have a moment like now, and everybody's like, what do I do? What do I do? And so it's hard at times not to feel bitter about it, because you're just like, I've been telling you. I've been I've been warning you. I've been saying, right? And you're like, it's not that you didn't listen to me, it's that you didn't believe me because it wasn't impacting you in those moments. And now that you see what's happening and there's a shift and a change, like suddenly you're back in the game. And that sort of like in and out, and that support and not support, right? That inconsistency that happens, it's so human though. It's just so human. And so I just watch it and I'm like, this is just a very human response to what is happening. And like, this is when I have to show up extra. And this is, like when the money isn't coming in as, consistently as we wanted, this is when I start adding different revenue streams and, like we change our hustle a little bit. But for me, it's really important that that doesn't change how I treat other people, that that doesn't change how I treat the people that are in my community and like are there and want to support, but maybe are carrying a little more fear than normal and therefore are dialing back sort of the ways they show up or the ways that they can support and fund something.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about where you were in 2018 and kind of coming into the pandemic, some of the things that you were working on at that time and yeah, what your career was like as you sort of came into that very difficult stretch.
I, oh man. So like 2018 was a great year. And then like 2019 was an exciting year and then 2020 was devastation. So like um 2019 was the year of Rita's quilt. So I had
So tell us about Rita's Quilts
yeah,
because that's an important project and a fantastic project as well.
thank you. Um so I go estate sale shopping. It's my favorite thing to do. And
As many of us do.
yes. But when I started doing it, I was sort of like, oh, this is kind of weird. Like I'm in this dead person's house going through all their stuff,
It
like,
is weird. Yeah.
buying things that they own for like $1. Like this is weird.
In the very rooms
Or
where they
in
live.
their rooms, right? Like
Right.
everything's
Mhm.
in situ. And I'm just like, I know everything about you based on everything I'm seeing, right? So then you have this like sort of weird personal narrative you've created for them. And, I'm just like, oh, I think we would have gotten along. We would have gone to that party together for sure. Like I'm just starting to like really connect. And so I'd find these unfinished projects, and usually they were just little like cross stitches or embroidery projects that just like weren't quite done. And so I would like feel compelled to buy them up and finish them. And then, normally I would just like donate them to Goodwill. But that was like just my little gift back. And also I was like, there's no way they're resting in craft peace, knowing that there's like an unfinished project out there. What? So I would finish these projects. And my friends sort of knew this thing about me. And then one day I went to it was the last estate sale of the day. It was the last one. We were just going to see what they had as we like strolled home and walked in, and there was this like absolutely gorgeous embroidery on the wall, like really like map of the US with all the state flowers. And it was just, I mean, it was just beautifully stitched, perfectly framed, like gorgeous. So I was like, oh, I have to have that. And I looked at it and it was $5. And I was just like, oh, come on. Like, that is so disrespectful. So I was like, all right, I'm buying this. And then the person running the estate sale was like, oh, if you need supplies, go into the bedroom. There's a whole bucket of supplies. And I'm like, sweet. So I go in there and I open this box and I start going through, and I realize this is not supplies. This is a project. And this is a massive quilt embroidery project that had been totally prepared, but like not started. And I just like looked at my friends and they were like, Shannon, no. I was like, but how can I not? And so I thought maybe it'll be too expensive. So I take it to the checkout and they're like, well, do you want the Tupperware that it comes in? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, $6. I was like, damn it. So I took it home, opened it up, was like, I could never do this. And like, this would take the rest of my life. But also, I'm not even a quilter. So, like, what am I thinking? So I went on Instagram and I was like, here's the story of what just happened. Does anybody want to help me? And within 24 hours, I had over 1,000 volunteers from across the country being like, and the world being like, you better pick me. And I was like, okay. So it was like, divvy it all up, send it out. They had 3 months to, no, they had 1 month to stitch their hexagon and send it back to me. And then we had a team of hand sewers who volunteered. We all got together and hand pieced the entire top of the quilt in 8 hours together. And then the Chicago Modern Quilt Guild got together and they did the quilting and the hand binding. And then, it was done and we were able to sort of showcase it to the world. And then the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky said, like, we want to exhibit this. Like, this is such an amazing story. Will you come down? And so we were like, hell yeah. So they created a beautiful exhibit. Like 40 of the people that worked on it and their families came in from all over the country so that we could all be there. So we just took over Paducah, Kentucky for like 3 days. We like got matching tattoos. I mean, it was madness. We had so much fun. The exhibit was gorgeous. And then it was supposed to stay up and be part of their annual quilt show and whatever else. And that was March 2020. And so that was the last thing. I was on the plane home and I was the only one on the plane. And I was like, what is going on? And then 2 days later, we shut down everything. And so the museum went dark for months and months and months. Nobody saw the exhibit. Eventually, they sent it back to me. And I ended up taking the quilt with me in my RV on tour around the country. Wild, just wild.
Yeah. And, what I am curious about is your impulse to include everyone. I guess, I think there are people who would see the project and say, oh, it's $6 with the Tupperware and I'll take it home. And now I'm overwhelmed, which is how you felt by it. Because this is not even really my craft. And this is too much for me to ever do. And maybe Rita originally felt the same way.
Right?
Who knows? Who knows? But they might have just put it in the closet or been like, I'll save it for another day, or just bring it to Goodwill and say, actually, I give up, But you had this impulse to say, no, let's bring all of these people together in all these different ways, whether it was stitching it from, your bedroom in California, or whether it was coming to do the hand stitching, the Modern Quilt Guild, going to Paducah, all these different people were part of it. And I think that's what's most remarkable about it. And that's where the craftivism piece comes in is community involvement. So where does that impulse come from you? Because I feel like it is unusual. It isn't everybody who would have made those choices.
All of my work is just to trick people into being in community with each other. Like, I don't care if you like to embroider. I don't care if you want to craft. Like, that's not the point. The point is, can I bring people together who may not ever share space together? And can we use that as an opportunity to connect and to build trust and to build engagement and to build these micro communities that we're going to need so desperately? We already do need them, right? But we really need them moving forward. And so in this case, it was a no-brainer to me. I didn't even think about it. I was just like, sweet, like, I can't do this by myself. Let's see if other people want to engage in this. And then they wanted to in a way that I couldn't even have imagined. And then I probably did I did over 100 press interviews over that project from like all over the world. And the thing, like, that was the thing that people were most excited by. It was just like, I can't believe that 150 people came together to work on this one project, and like that it went so smoothly and so successfully and whatever. And it's like, that's the whole point, is like, how can we keep modeling that this is the behavior that we need to see when we're dealing with the loneliness epidemic that we are dealing with right now. And we're seeing just the loss of all of these places where people are so used to connecting, and like, clubs don't exist anymore. And we've created a world where we're more and more okay being isolated. We don't even have to. I was saying the other day, like, somebody was like, when are you voting? And I'm like, oh, I vote on election day every time if I can help it. And they're like, oh my God, why? Like, you can just like fill out the form and mail it in. And I was like, I want to walk into a room with other people who are voting. I want to feel that energy. I want to say hello. I want to have some engagement. I want to fill out my form. I want to get my sticker and eat my donut and go home. And like, I love those moments. I love to go to the grocery store because I love to interact with people in these like little ways. And I feel like we're working really hard to not have those things. And then we're like really curious about why everybody's so sad. Like, I know why. Can we please?
And not
So
only are we so sad, but we also lack understanding of other people's perspectives because we just aren't interacting with them.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, look at where we're at, right? Like this really bipolar sort of situation going on. And it's just, I don't know. It makes me sad. And that's why the work that I do feels so important and so vital. And like to create these spaces through joyful avenues, I think is also really important. And like to meet people where they're used to being at. Like I sit at home and I stitch every night by myself. Like, oh, that's awesome. Also, how about one day a week you don't do that and you come and you stitch in community with others? And it transforms people and it transforms their connections to others. And so for me, like I didn't even think twice about it was, like, oh, here's a project that I could never finish by myself, but I desperately want to finish because I have already fallen in love with this woman who passed, and like we need to honor her and all of the women who leave projects behind. And it was just like, all right, ask for what you need. Go on the internet and see if anybody like wants to join in. And people are desperate to connect and to be involved in things. So that everybody was like, hell yeah, I'm in. Let's do this.
I want to take a minute now to talk about our sponsor, Craftsy. And here is a message from Craftsy. At Craftsy, we know making. Whether you're new to the handmade life or looking to advance your skills, we have classes for all maker levels and interests. From knitting and sewing to quilting and embroidery, cooking, baking, paper crafts, and more, Craftsy's instructors guide and encourage you, empowering you to turn ideas into realities. And they have an exclusive offer for Craft Industry Alliance podcast listeners. Right now, you can get a whole year of their premium membership for only $1.49 as part of Craftsy's extended Black Friday deal. Visit craftsyoffers.com to sign up, and the discount will be automatically applied at checkout. For only $1.49, you'll get a full year of access to over 2,000 premium full-length classes. Take your craft to new levels with Craftsy. If you're an absolute beginner, Craftsy's instructors help build strong foundations as they teach, setting you up for success and helping you fix mistakes as you go. Their enthusiasm and strong teaching style make learning accessible to all. If you're an experienced maker, Craftsy's for you too. From perfecting your fondant skills to tackling complex stitches. From eye-catching garden design to next steps in sourdough. Craftsy has advanced classes in all crafts from instructors who are experts in their field. With over 2,000 classes, including downloadable patterns and recipes, Craftsy has a class and a craft for everyone. Visit craftsyoffers.com today and get a year of Craftsy premium membership for just $1.49. Don't miss out on 99% off for the entire year. Start turning ideas into projects you can be proud of. Get this exclusive offer at craftsyoffers.com. Thank you so much, Craftsy. And now back to my conversation with Shannon. Let's talk a little bit about your RV because you spent a lot of time in your RV. Just tell us a little bit about that time and sort of what happened.
Yeah, I had this brilliant idea in 2019 that this was pre-Rita's Quilt, that I would spend a year planning. And then in June of 2020, I'd given up my apartment, like not renewed my lease. I had hired and trained my replacement at my job. I'd given up the classes I was teaching. I sold everything I owned and I bought an RV. And I was like, this is going to be great. So I booked a 1-year tour across the country. I had like 150 events planned. It was going to be amazing. And then March happened. And then I was like, oh, whatever, no big deal. It's going to be 2 weeks. We're all going to stay inside and then everything will be fine by June. Haha. So then June came and I was like, oh my God, I'm moving into an RV in the middle of a pandemic. I don't, every event that I had planned got canceled. Like I have no income. And what most people don't know at the beginning of the pandemic is a lot of the RV parks closed. So then I was like, I don't even have anywhere to like put this, like park it and live. And I was like, I cannot live in Walmart parking lots. Oh my God. So again, I went to my digital community and I asked for what I needed. And I said, hey, I have no idea what I'm doing, but if you have a flat-ish driveway and an outdoor plug and you would be willing to host me as I come through, like no more than 3 days, sign up on this Google Doc. And then like 3,000 people across the country signed up. And so I spent the first 2 years just driveway hopping around the country, meeting the coolest people. And, you know, it's the pandemic. So like nobody's meeting people. And I'm out there and there's nobody else out there and gas is like $1 and there's nobody on the roads. And I'm like, this is the life, you know, and I'm staying in people's driveways. And it was just I had a very different pandemic experience than I think almost anybody. And I'm so grateful for it. And then that was when I realized like, oh, I have to take my work digital, you know, like we have to be doing these workshops on Zoom and, you know, like otherwise I'm not going to have any income. And
Mhm.
I was really concerned because I had never done anything, you know, I'd never done any of these workshops or gatherings online. And I was very worried that the magic would be lost because we weren't in the same room together. And I was so, so wrong. The magic was there and probably amplified because people were so desperate to, you know, connect with others. Um, and people were super generous. And so I was able to just like totally pivot and restructure the entire plan. And I ended up staying out on the road for like 2.5 years. I
That's
was gonna,
amazing.
yeah, I was gonna do a second or a third year. And then I got hit by a drunk driver and he totaled the RV and that was the end of the the RV life for
How
me.
incredibly scary. Were you
Yeah.
driving when this happened?
Yes,
Oh
I
my
was
gosh.
on the highway. I am just so grateful that the other driver was not dead because he should have been. Like, absolutely should have been. So, like, my RV got real messed up and I lost a lot of stuff, but I was totally uninjured and, you know, like I was able to drive it off the exit. He not so much and went over a cliff and down and a tree branch through his front window. And I thought, oh, he's been decapitated. Like I can't open that door because I can never unsee that. Um, but he wasn't, and he was totally fine. And so I was just like, you know what? This is a win. Just gonna, I'm just gonna be done.
Yeah. Wow. That's a traumatic ending
It was,
to
it was a very dramatic ending.
yeah, yeah, dramatic and traumatic. And
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about the workshops because you mentioned that you were teaching workshops before you left and then pivoted them to Zoom during the pandemic. Embroidery is really your strength. And maybe you can also talk a little bit about why embroidery, because, you know, some people might think, well, I don't do embroidery, so I can't really participate, or this isn't really for me. But you've chosen embroidery as the sort of main expression of craftivism in your own work.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the only craft I'm good at. So it's embroidery all day long. But you know, so a lot of my workshops have like back in the day were like intro to embroidery, and it was really just about getting people trying something they'd never done before. And particularly in the pandemic, it's so easy to source those materials from around your house. And because there wasn't a lot of access to materials, it was sort of like, okay, this really
If
lends
you've
itself.
made a if you've made a friendship bracelet, you probably
Totally.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. And like I had a list of like alternative materials. Like, if you can't find this, we'll work with this. If you can't find it, so it was like a really easy way to get people engaged in something new. And at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody wanted new crafts and new hobbies and like something to do. So it was really easy to get people engaged in that way. Um, and then, I do a lot of like intro to craftivism workshops that are also embroidery based, but more context around what is craftivism and like how can we use our creative selves as tools within our activism. Um, I do host at the beginning of the pandemic, it was weekly. I called them stitch ups. And it was just like I would open Zoom and be like, anybody who wants to come and work on whatever you're working on, and we will just hang out with cool people from around the world and like pretend we're not in a pandemic. That was the rule, is that we're not processing our trauma. We're just showing up and like escaping it. We're disassociating for 2 hours, y'all, together. Um, and the community that came out of that, I mean, I can't even describe it. There's hundreds, and there's folks from all over the world. And what happens now, whatever, almost 5 years later, is I'm I'm getting pictures of like, folks from Texas who've gone over to the UK to hang out with the UK stitchers that they met on this in these groups. And like people are just in real life connecting and becoming friends. And I have met so many of these people in person, which is always my goal, right? Like I'm not interested. Like there is some people who just based on distance and whatever, like I'm probably not going to meet you in person. But anybody that I can meet in person, that for me is like the absolute goal, is to take the relationship offline and into real life. And the RV actually enabled a lot of that. Like I was staying in driveways of a lot of the people who were coming to the stitch ups. And so we still do that once a month. And so that's interesting because people like every craft is represented in the room. And so it's fun to watch people dabble in new crafts because they've met somebody who's like a proficient crocheter and they're like, I've always wanted to try that. And they're like, oh, here are the best videos to watch and try it. And so people are really expanding their craft repertoire as well, just by the nature of being in this community with other makers.
So after the crash, you didn't have a place to go to because
True.
you had, as you said, sold all your belongings and didn't renew your lease. So that's sort of scary because, or would have been for me at least, because I would have been like, well, I don't know what to do now. Like, where do I belong? So how did you regroup and what kind of came next?
Yeah, I had been heading to Massachusetts. My mom was about to have a knee replacement. So I was like wrapping up a couple events, and then I was going to go there and spend a month helping her with her transition, and then make the plan for the next year and then head out. And so I was like, well, uh, the events got canceled because I couldn't get to them. And I ended up, you know, so the cop lost my license on the side of the road. And so then I didn't have a license. So I couldn't rent a truck to like get the remaining stuff and drive back. So
So he took your license and
yeah,
then didn't give it back?
he took it. And then when I, hubbub, all this movement, whatever. And I was like, hey, can I get my license back? And he was like, I don't have your license. And I was like, no, I definitely gave him anyways, he lost my license. So I had to fly a friend from Florida to Pittsburgh, to rent a truck to cut. Anyways, we take this adventure back to Massachusetts. So I'm with my family for a month, and then I'm like, I'll figure it out. I'll figure out what to do next. And I realized like I can't possibly make any major life decisions right now. Like this is so disorienting. But I also like cannot live with my family for an indefinite amount of time for all of our sanity. So I was like, I'm just going to rent an apartment on the beach here in Massachusetts. I'm going to finish my book because I was, working on that. I was like, and I'm going to give myself a year to just figure out what I want to do next. And so that's what I did. I got a great place on the beach. I finished my book. I was a teaching artist at the ICA Boston. And then like 6 months into the year, I was like, I'm going back to Chicago. I have to go back to Chicago. And so at the end of that year, I moved back to Chicago and I've been back about a year and a half now.
And how did this book come about? So this is called Let's Move the Needle, an activism handbook for artists, crafters, creatives, and makers. And it was published by Story Publishing, which is in Western Mass. I love Story. And
They're
in
great.
fact, Deborah Belmuth was just on the show again a couple of weeks back. But so it sounds like this book deal maybe came about while you were still on the road and before this sort of tumultuous ending of that period happened. So did you say, I really want to write a book? Let me find a publisher. Did you meet somebody from Story or somebody recommended you there? Or like how did, it's always interesting to know how a book comes to be.
Well, my story is unsurprisingly very strange when it comes to this book. Like, in 2018, I must have written something very smart because like there was 1 month where I got calls from like 8 literary agents saying, we want to make a book with you. And I didn't know what a literary agent was because I never had any aspirations of making a book. And a friend of mine who's an author, after like the 4th one called and I ignored them, I called this author and I was like, what is this literary agent nonsense? Is this like a scam? Because it feels like a scam. He's like, no, Shannon, it's the dream. Like, meet with all of them or else. And I was like, oh, oops, okay. So I met with them all, and like 7 out of 8 of them wanted to make a craft book with me, and I just was so not interested in
Meaning
that.
a book of projects. Like,
Yes.
let's do 20 projects that are all, snarky phrases or something of that nature. Yeah.
Totally. And I was like, there are a bunch of those out and they're great. And I don't need to do that. Like that's not what I do, right? Like I am an
Right.
activist.
That's missing the point of what
Exactly.
it is. Yes.
Exactly. And then I met my literary agent now, who's the greatest human who's ever worked on anything. I can't say enough good things about her. And
Tell us who she is
oh,
because people need to
yes,
know.
Marcini Stefanides from Arc Literary.
Okay.
And we were on the phone for like 4 hours and she walked me, like she got me, she got like, she had a vision that I didn't even know I should have. And I was like, yeah, let's do this. Like, I want to make a book because now I want to work with you.
Yeah.
And so we worked on this book proposal for many, many months and she was about to start sending it out. And I was like, stop, don't do it. She's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, that's not the book. And she's like, oh, what's off? And I'm like, I don't know, but I know it's not the book and I can't write this book and I don't want you to sell this book and I just need to figure it out. And she's like, okay, what do you want to do next? And I'm like, I don't know, think about it and I'll call you back when I know what it is. And she's like, all right. And then it was 2 years later. I was like, hey, remember me? I think I know the book. And she's like, of course, like, let's do this. And then she was like, let's work on a book proposal. And I was like, no, I'm just going to write the book. And she's like, oh, Shannon, that's not how it works. Like, if somebody doesn't buy the book, then and I was like, it doesn't matter. This book is ready and it's coming out of me. And I do not want money or deadlines or people in my ear about like trying to shape this thing. I need to write the book I need to write and then we can sell it. And if that doesn't happen, it's fine. I'll self-publish. And she was like,
right.
Okay.
Can I ask what the first book was that didn't happen? What was wrong with it?
In hindsight, now I realize I was really angry at that period of time based on what was happening in the world and our country. And like all of my rage was coming through in that book and in that book proposal. And that is not what I wanted to bring to the world, right? Like I did not want to show up from a place of anger. It felt kind of preachy. Like there was just nothing about it that I felt good about in terms of the energy that I want to bring to people and the way that I bring people in to connect and learn. It was wrong. And so when I finally realized that was the problem, I was like, oh, easy breezy. So I literally spent, 8 months writing the book. And then I was like, okay, it's ready. Let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
So we sent it out in July of last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people wanted to work with me. And they were all like, yeah, if you just like dial back the activism and like lean into the craft more, we'd be all over this. I was like, this is why I wrote the book first, because I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want this. And I
They're
was just,
like, where are the 20 projects?
yeah, exactly. And
It's
I was
all
just
about the
like,
20 projects.
it is. And I was like, no, like that's like, we will not be working together. So I had two meetings that went really great, but the story meeting was literally perfect. And I was just like, and Deborah was literally the reason why I picked story, because I was like, she gets me. She gets this. They're excited about this. They're not afraid of it. Like,
Right.
this is what I need. And then my caveat was I need the book out before the election next year.
Oh,
And they were
wow.
and they were like, we've never worked that fast on anything. Like that is under a year. And I'm like, I believe in us. And they agreed to it. And then they worked harder and faster than I've ever seen anybody work. And we all did. And it came out October 1st. And I'm so grateful that it's out now.
And how true to that manuscript is the final book? In other words, having never written a book before,
Yeah.
and you're writing the whole manuscript, which is a gigantic job. I mean, this is like I'm imagining a gigantic like Google Doc that's huge. Like how much of it did they say actually this is like not the way you do this? You need to change this around, and how much of it were they like, oh no, perfect?
They didn't do any substantive edits on it. It was all just copy editing. It
Wow.
was like,
Okay.
yeah, it was, I mean, I write well. I'm a writer. Like I love writing. And like this was so easy for me to like structure in a
Mm,
way that made sense for people. Um, and so by the time they got it, they were just sort of like, oh yeah, like we don't have to
hmm.
touch this beyond, copy editing and all of that. So it was exciting.
So tell us what people will find inside.
It is truly like a step-by-step handbook for basically how you are, like can be a community organizer, right? So it's not a craft book. It is an activism book, but it is through the lens of art and craft, and like seeing art and craft as a tool for activism and as like a beautiful extension of some of the work that has to be done. So like what they're going to be introduced to is like a little bit of inspiration. So like historical examples and present examples of some of what I think are the best examples of craftivism, both past
Which
and
if people are
present.
like, and if people are like, I don't know what you're talking about. For example, I think most people have heard of the AIDS quilt.
Sure.
You talk about the AIDS quilt, that's an example.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, and from there, it's like, or a little self-reflection, because as an activist, if you aren't doing the work on yourself, it's really hard to show up in spaces and be an effective activist. So we got to start there. Then we go into research, doing root cause analysis, how to create a team and or join a team, right? Because we don't all have to start new things. We can find the people who are already doing it and find ways to plug in. But really thinking through that strategically, so we're in the right communities and doing the work that feels most in alignment with our values and vision for the world. We're going into like resource mapping, setting goals, messaging and tactics, milestones, timelines, assessments. I mean, it really is like the handbook. And in the end, we talk about, and throughout, we talk about what is an activist lifestyle? Like, what is the one issue that you're going to commit the rest of your life to and really focus on as a way to like manage our work, as a way to not like have to pull back from a movement because we are overwhelmed, and as a way to just like make this a part of your everyday life. And then some planning templates so that people can go from the tiniest little community project or community making experience to a global project or initiative.
And you're going on a book tour, which is fascinating to me because I feel like, especially with craft books, few people go on book
Yeah.
tours. And I published my first book way back in like, I want to say it was 2012 or something. And even then, some people were still going on book tours, but it was
Yeah.
quickly fading.
Yeah.
But you're making it happen, and no surprise because, as you said, meeting people in person is what you're all about. But how did you sort of make that happen? Because it's not that you can't go on a book tour. It's just that it's hard to do because the funding isn't there, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah, it was tricky. The publisher story has been wildly supportive, and they were like, yeah, like, let's get you out there. Let's do a couple stops. The challenge with me is the minute I say, hey, I'm going to do a little book tour, I'm going to start on the East Coast. Here's my first stop. Then I got just like inundated by people being like, come here, come here, come here. And so I was able to like magically arrange 13 events in 12 cities in 13 days. Like it was
Amazing.
bonkers. And it was the most fun ever. So I spent all of the first 3 weeks of October on tour on the East Coast. And it was fun because it was a combination of like just traditional book talks, but also a lot of them were book talks / crafting events. So I would
Right.
do the traditional book talk, and then we would roll right into like a demonstration of what the book stands for and means. And so it was really this way that people could embody the experience of what I'm trying to teach in the book, and to have the opportunity to make things and connect, and to like leave a book talk with new friends. Like that's
Yeah,
unheard of, you know?
that's great. Yeah.
So I did that, and then I came back here and I threw a rager. I threw a huge party in Chicago because I wanted people in Chicago to have the experience of like walking into my book. Like I didn't want to do a traditional book event here in Chicago. I wanted it to be a fundraiser, and I wanted it to be the experience of like being enveloped in my book. So I brought in like 15 different art activists from across the country, and they were showcasing their work, and there were interactives, and it was a fundraiser, and there was a raffle, a quilt raffle, because a quilt guilds got 80 people together to make a quilt that we could raffle off at this thing. I mean, it was incredible. And it was a really successful event. I slept for like 6 days after, but so I'm doing some Midwest stuff now. And then I do the West Coast and Utah in the late winter, so February and March.
Right. Okay. And
Yeah.
so it's really interesting to see how you can build community around a book. And I think that that's something for people to consider and think about, whether it's a craft book or an activism handbook, et cetera. But there are ways to build community and bring other artists in and other speakers in and groups in to build community around a book. So I think that's super
And
great. Yeah.
it's really like important to me that anything I do, like any opportunity I get, I can create space for other people to have that opportunity as well. So like anytime I get invited to do a show somewhere, like have a museum or a gallery, I always include Badass Herstory projects in there, so that um, folks who don't even think of themselves as artists but have contributed beautiful pieces of art to this project can see their work in a museum, can see their work, like folks who just would never have that opportunity. The same with, this book event. It's like, yeah, I made a book, that's exciting, but I made a book about community and about supporting others. And so like that has to be the experience of this book. And so that's why it's like, how many artists can I bring in and get paid? I mean, I raised $17,000 to throw that party so that I could pay every artist who participated in it, so that I could fundraise for the Chicago Freedom School, so it's, it really is the driving force behind everything I do, is like, okay, it's not about me. I'm just like the instigator here. It's really about like how much space can I open up for others, and how much community and connection can I create as a result.
So let's talk a little bit about a grant that you organized. Speaking of bringing opportunity to others. This is a craftivism grant. It's open right now. You do it annually. You've been doing it for a couple of years now. And it helps somebody get a craftivism project off the ground.
Yeah. About 4 years ago, I got like a commission I wasn't expecting. And so I just had this $500 that sort of was unplanned. And I thought, well, I could keep it or I could pay it forward. And that sounds kind of exciting. And I was getting a lot of questions, right? Like a lot of emails like, hey, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I just didn't have the time or capacity to respond to everybody because of how many I get. So I thought maybe I could make this grant and then that would be an opportunity to just like work with one person and really support them over the course of a whole year, which felt like a much more significant use of my time versus like answering these little questions here and there that were like totally stressing me out because there were so many of them. So I started this grant with the $500. That was, the seed money for the grant, but it also included 20 hours of my time as a strategic advisor over the course of the year. And since then it has grown because other people see it and they're like, "Oh, I could help." So other people are pitching in money and like last year it was $1,000. The year before that, I think it was 1,500, right? Like, so other people are just like putting money in. Corey Williams, who wrote the book Microactivism, she is on board as a strategic coach. So she will work with the winner in a coaching session. This year's story is supporting with a whole pile of art and activism books for the winner. So like every year it's a little different. But I like to really model that like philanthropy is for everybody, that we don't need these major institutions all the time. Like we can help each other. We can support each other. And so the grant is open now. It's on my website, badasscrossstitch.com. It's open until December 20th. Then I close it and we announce the winner January 1st. And I work with them for a full year. And then we open it again in October. So it's in October through December. And I try to keep the application pretty simple because I don't want people spending a ton of time on it. But I do, have some questions that need to get answered to make the right choice. So I hope people will apply this year. I think we've got a lot of motivation right now.
Absolutely. And before we get to your recommendations, I wanted to touch on the sort of, you describe it as a callus or calluses that you've built up around negative feedback online, because you are very online. You have a huge following on Instagram. You've talked a lot about the outpouring of support from your digital community and how it's transformed into real life community. But with that, and with, taking a strong stand, being an instigator, you're going to get a lot of negative commentary, some of which can be really mean, and like vile and awful. And it can come at you daily. I mean, just because you've got so many posts and such a large following. And so I find that kind of feedback to be really difficult to handle. And although I consider myself to have somewhat of a thick skin, it's hard. It's really hard. So how do you survive that? Like what do you put into place to help you with that?
Yeah, I mean, over the years, I have really just sort of like set some guidelines for myself around social media, and how I act on social media has changed significantly over like even just the past like 8 years. Like if you go to some of my much older posts, I'm like, oh yeah, I was really leading with anger there. I was just, but like what I post and how I post it and how I word things can deeply impact the response that I get. And
Mm,
so I have really figured out some of the ways that I want to show up and present information for people that is less triggering. It's less inflammatory, if you will. And that has really cut down on a lot of the hate. But it's endless and it's relentless. I think I'm just built for it. Like I really I'm pretty unaffected by it most of the time. Occasionally, one will slip in and I'll be like, ooh, huh, I'm going to log off for the day because that hurt. And like, I don't, but I choose not to engage with it. I ask my followers not to engage with it because a lot of times it's bots, right? Or it's people who are looking to provoke. And like, that's not what I want happening in my space. And so I block a lot of people a lot. I don't think twice. It's block, delete, block, delete, block, delete. Um, because it's my space and I get to decide who shows up and how they, how they talk to me and how they treat others. Because that sometimes that's the worst is like they're not talking to me, they're fighting with each other. And I see like it escalate and escalate. And I'm like, no, I'm going to nip that in the bud right now. Right. Like we are not doing this. Block, delete, remove, whatever. So I'm not precious about followers. Like I'm not worried about like, oh, am I going to lose followers over this? Like, I do not care. If I lose followers because I said something true, then goodbye. Right? Like it's just I have a very different relationship with it. And I think probably because I don't monetize any of it. So there's no like I talk to a lot of people who have trouble blocking, deleting, or like managing these moments because a lot of their income comes through the sheer number of people that they have and the engagement numbers that they have. And I don't monetize any of that because I don't want any of that, like, clouding any of my choices. I just
Right.
want to
And
save
though
space.
it's sort of, it's sort of monetized in kind of a sideways way because to get a book deal often, right?
Mhm.
Publishers are like,
Oh
what's your
yeah,
reach?
totally.
Right.
Yeah.
So even though you're not, doing a brand deal where they're saying, well, we want it to have this much engagement. So that's a much more direct monetization.
Yeah.
It's monetized in a way just because some of these, to be able, I don't know about the ICA, which is a really big institution here in Massachusetts, but probably some of these, bigger teaching gigs and anyway, other bigger opportunities, they are going to be like, Shannon Downey, let me go see. And then they're like, oh, huge. Okay, great. Or, oh,
Yeah,
not so,
there's like
so,
like a level of credibility that
right.
perceived credibility
Perceived.
that
Correct.
comes through it. Um, but my goal is always make that actual credibility. Like I want to show up for people in the way that I want to build this community. Like it is a community. I do not think of people as followers. I think of them as humans. I think of them as community. And so anything I create, I'm creating for and on behalf of the community that I have built. And it's just it's a different way of looking at it that leads to different opportunities, right?
Right.
But 100% with the book, I mean, it's pretty gross if you like, as I got into this world and you hear the things and you see the things and you're just sort of like, oh, wow, this is gross. There's so many people who have brilliant ideas and who have written brilliant things who are not getting these opportunities just because they don't know how to market or they don't have a digital following or whatever. Um, and it's a wild, it's very hard to be anti-capitalist and live in capitalism. It's very hard to like live on the fringes. And so like I was saying at the end of this month, like I don't make any money on this book until I sell like 25,000 copies, right? I don't get royalties until then. So that's a long game, right? And then the book tour was super exciting and the publisher paid the expenses of travel and food. But I had no income for October because I was on the road and I was doing this and it still cost me money. And so at the end of October, I was like, I feel like TLC at the Grammys, like when they won on, they had all their awards and they were standing there and they're like, everybody was just praising them and like, this is amazing. And they're like, we can't pay our bills. like we have been boxed out of accessing all of the funds that have to do with us. And and those are the moments where you're just like, no matter what, we really just have to keep hustling, right? Like I have to have new revenue streams and whatnot. And so it's like it's a hard game and it's a hard balance, especially when like my motivation for it is community and bringing people together and others. And at the same time, it's like, oh, I got to pay my bills though, if I want to keep doing this. Otherwise, you know, it's back to a 9 to 5. And I would rather not do that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that honesty and perspective. I want to make sure we get to your list. So you have the Golden Bachelorette. I have no idea what this is. So what is this? I need
What,
to,
Abby?
I know.
Okay. It is part of the Bachelor Bachelorette franchise. The Golden Bachelorette is the 60 plus crew. And so this time, so there was a Golden Bachelor already, which of course I watched. And this was the Golden Bachelorette. So she is 61 and all of her suitors are 60 plus. And I am obsessed with it because, and particularly this season, because I thought, oh, this will be interesting to watch sort of like older gentlemen and like what is, I find straight people fascinating. I'm like, I have to understand this. And uh the most powerful, impactful, and I hope everybody who's watching it is seeing what I'm seeing, is that these men have been starved for male connection with other dudes their age who've been through the shit that they've been through. And the most gorgeous part of this whole season is just watching these men like connect with each other and find community and like realize that their life is so much better when they're connected to and not in competition with others. And oh my God, it's gorgeous. So I am 100% obsessed. Also, I hope she picks the right person because I have decided for her.
All right. You also wanted to recommend The Complexity of Parasocial Relationships. For me, I listen to a lot of podcasts. And so I have lots of parasocial relationships with podcasts hosts
Mhm.
who I've been listening to sometimes for a decade. So I don't know if that's exactly what you're describing, but
Yeah, it's just fascinating. Like I have so many parasocial relationships and like so many centered on me, right? So folks who we've connected online and like really it could just be as simple as like they just absorb my content. We don't even
yeah,
engage with each other.
yeah,
Um but then they know me in a lot of
right.
ways, and then I'm out and I'm at an event and people who I don't know are coming up to me saying things like, oh my God, I was so sad when your dog passed, and like like you in the RV got me through the pandemic, like it was so fun to
Mhm.
watch and whatever. And it's so humbling, and it's so, I don't know. It feels both good and bad because I'm like, I want to know about you. Like all this about me, and I literally feel bad that I don't even know your name yet, right? And so for me, it's like, how do I take these parasocial relationships and like transition them into real connection and like two-way relationships and like so I'm just like living in this space of obsessing over how do I how do I connect with even more people? I just want to know everybody, frankly.
Yeah. I think there needs to be more exploration and more written about being the person for whom other people have that parasocial relationship because I, have a very different audience than you, but I still find that to be really jarring at times, to go
Hmm.
to a trade show and just be talking to somebody and someone else recognizes my voice
Yeah.
because they listen to the podcast and then they know all of these things and I've never met them. And so I feel like it's wonderful, but it's
Mhm.
also very odd. And I think there needs to be more written about that, about how to cope with that, what to do with that in a productive way.
Yeah, and like sometimes people like assume I know who they are, right? Like because maybe we have
Yes.
had a little back and forth on digital,
on email or something. And so they're like, remember when I said this?
Yeah.
And in all honesty, it's like, I don't remember.
I'm like, I meet hundreds of thousands of people over the last couple of years just. And so but I want to remember and I want to know them and I don't.
Of course.
And so I'm always super grateful for the people who come up and are like, okay, you don't know me, but I XYZ, and they like give me context.
Yes.
And I am so good at remembering context. So if they say anything that triggers that memory, I'm like, oh my God, like, yay. So I am always so grateful when people can help me so that I don't feel bad, frankly, because I want to know them. And I love that they care about my work and care about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting something to explore further in the future.
Book number 2.
Yeah, for real. Okay, and your last recommendation are your yay flags.
Oh my God, yes. I made this little flag that just says "Yay me." I'm waving it right now. During the pandemic, at a time when I was like, oh my God, like everything is overwhelming, and I really I need a way to remind myself to celebrate the little wins. Like, and in an RV, it was literally like, okay, I emptied the septic. Yes. I didn't get any on me. Yay me. Right? Like literally we're talking very small wins here. But as I started to like embrace this silly little, ritual, I realized like, oh, there's so much to celebrate every day. And we can really get bogged down in the like in all the muck without seeing all these beautiful moments and like all of these things that we have done successfully. And so I made some for some friends, and then they became obsessed with them. And then I like mentioned them in the book offhand. And then somebody read the book and was like, oh my God, can we make yay flags when you come through on your book tour? And I was like,
it's the perfect thing. Yeah.
Yes. So we have just been making yay flags left and right. And now I'm not kidding. Like people love this. And so now like there are corporate events where people are making yay flags for their teams and the nonprofits in the classrooms. Like the yay flag is catching on and I am here for it. And so there's a free tutorial on my website.
Perfect.
I walk you through how to make the perfect yay flag.
All right. I'm going to link to that in the show notes if folks want to go grab that. So
Fantastic.
That's fabulous. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for coming back on the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. It was just amazing talking to you.
It was really fun being back. Thanks for having me.
And you've been listening to the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Today's episode was brought to you by Craftsy. Calling all crafters. Are you ready to dive deep into your favorite crafting projects and learn new techniques along the way? Then it's time to join Craftsy Premium Membership. Take advantage of this extended Black Friday deal. For only $1.49, you'll receive a full year of access to expert-led tutorials, patterns, and projects in every category you can imagine. With a massive library of resources at your fingertips, you'll be able to create your best work yet and bring your crafting dreams to life. Don't wait. Sign up now at CraftsyOffers.com and discover the endless possibilities of Craftsy Premium Membership. Thank you so much, Craftsy. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals. When you become a member of Craft Industry Alliance, you get in-depth coverage of craft industry news, the opportunity to connect with fellow professionals for advice and support, and access to an educational library filled with ideas, tools, and resources to help you as you build your business. Join us at craftindustrialliance.org. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.